Ghoulies and ghosties, and things that go bump in the night. They have haunted our imaginations since history began. In legends and rituals, in monuments and stories, the dead are always there. But is it really possible for anything to return from the grave? Even today, the question grips us with fascinated fear. Are they real? Or can science find another answer for what we think we see and hear? Enter the fifth dimension and discover the scientific truth behind ghosts. Ghosts fascinate, frighten, and play on our deepest fears.
I can definitely hear somebody here, and I'm not enjoying it. I'm really not enjoying it.
Are they trying to contact us, or do we call them into existence?
That apparition was standing a couple of feet in front of me.
Every culture throughout time has its own supernatural beliefs. Some ghosts are angry, some bring warnings. Some even appear cast in stone. But is there any real proof they exist? Today, science is trying to unlock this mystery.
They're actually feeling breathing on the back of the neck, and I can see there's no one behind them.
I don't feel alone.
Can ghosts survive the sophisticated equipment and glare of modern science? Great Britain is a good place to start the journey. Some claim it's the most haunted country in the world. 2,000 years of history, crammed with warring kings and queens, castles and battlefields. There are over 300 recorded haunted sites and every kind of ghost, from headless horsemen to graveyard spectres. The UK has it all. More than 500 groups specialize in the paranormal. There's an entire industry dedicated to ghost hunting. Professor Richard Wiseman is a psychologist from University of Hartford. He specializes in the paranormal. How does he think science and the supernatural fit together?
As a scientist working in this rather unusual field, to me what's important is we chase up and examine the best evidence. So if people say, wow, this building is haunted, and over time lots of people have visited that building and they all have strange experiences in a certain location, science can't explain this particular case, then that's the case that we should look at.
So can he find a scientific explanation for what's happening in one of Britain's most haunted houses? Hampton Court Palace on the outskirts of London. Built by a cardinal, stolen by one king, a prison for another. For 500 years, it's witnessed some of the most dramatic events in British history. Maybe those events have left their memories in the ancient stones. But that's not the only reason why tourists flock here. Ian Franklin is a guard at the palace.
The public are fascinated, and it is true when people come to the palace, the question a lot of us are asked first is where can we find the haunted pots? actually seeing a ghost at Hampton Court is a very rare phenomenon indeed. It's usually the feelings that of panic or fear, or the feeling of being pushed, punched, kicked. They're the things that are much more readily reported here.
In the 16th century, Henry VIII took the palace as his home and made it the scene for his colourful and complicated home life. Legend has it that the ghosts of some of his 6 wives still stalk the corridors.
And these are experiences that are very, very difficult to write off as being natural phenomenon. There is something going on.
One ghost is particularly famous. In 1542, Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, was imprisoned here, charged with adultery and condemned to death. The night before her execution, she ran weeping to the king's rooms, pleading for her life.
And she banged on the door in vain. The story goes that her guards grabbed hold of her, recaptured her and dragged her away kicking and screaming towards her rooms.
The king refused to listen. The next day she was beheaded. Over 400 years later, some say her ghost still runs through the galleries, and tourists hoping to catch a glimpse sometimes get more than they bargained for.
The palace had a little bit of a problem because on recent tours some visitors had fainted and had some very unusual experiences at some particular locations in the palace, and they wanted to understand what was going on. Now, they weren't saying that ghosts actually exist or that ghosts don't exist. They wanted an open-minded scientific investigation.
It was time for Richard Wiseman to step in. Armed with a team of ghost-busting researchers and 500 members of the public, his investigation was the largest paranormal operation ever set up. But ghosts are hard to pin down. The public were asked to walk through the palace and record any strange sensations they experienced. The aim was to try and profile the palace hotspots. Psychologist Kieran O'Keefe worked on the project.
There are a few people reported actually seeing something, and they may have put down that it was a ghost, but they weren't able to say that there was an actual figure there. So people did report seeing something, yes.
What was it that the amateur Ghostbusters were experiencing?
Around about 50% of people reported something unusual. So sometimes they would say, yeah, it's a really strange sense of presence. Or there's something about the corner over there, I suddenly felt very cold. Or I just walked down this part of the corridor and suddenly had a burning sensation on my arm. Not only that, around about 25% of people actually attributed these experiences to a ghost. So there's something going on.
There were a couple of places that I thought there could be ghosts. So I felt a temperature change, so I wrote it down.
The highest rating spot was Catherine Howard's gallery. Could it be the young Queen's tormented spirit? Or was there another answer? Infrared cameras set up around the palace monitored changes in the physical environment and helped turn up some intriguing results.
Now, what's interesting is in the experiment, it's also the area where lots of people had some very strange experiences. And what's really interesting is it's also the place we found some very unusual magnetic fields. Now, it's a controversial theory, but maybe somehow those fields were causing people to have some rather causing people to have some rather strange and ghostly experiences.
The answer could lie over 2,000 miles away. In Canada, Professor Michael Persinger is trying to understand how the human brain responds to magnetic fields. His work could help explain the phenomena at Hampton Court.
If we apply the fields in a specific sequence, we can induce the experience of a sensed presence, that there are some entities standing beside the person, the idea of someone standing nearby.
I don't feel alone. I see a face.
Well, suppose that same experiences, the same richness and vividness and feeling of a presence and something taking over your body occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning when you were by yourself in your bedroom.
Somebody just shut the lid.
Then, of course, there would be a different explanation. You wouldn't have the easy, pat explanation, well, the experimenters are doing it.
Cindy?
What?
We're coming in. Just relax, okay?
Yeah.
One thing we do know is that the experiences that we call God and mystical experiences are from the brain. And now we know we can experimentally duplicate them, at least fragments of them, in the laboratory.
So are ghosts just the brain's reaction to magnetic fields, helped by people's own imagination? It's certainly a field where hoaxes flourish. Set deep in the catacombs of Rome, this 1970s film about the supernatural hoped to prove that psychic phenomena were real. Despite all the trappings of a B-movie, many treated it as hard evidence. The séance is led by a medium, a figure who claims to contact the dead. As the spirit enters the medium's body, ectoplasm spews from his mouth. Believers say this is the spirit taking on a physical form. When the apparition appears, contact with the dead has finally been made, or so it's claimed. At the end of the ritual, the wax-like ectoplasm is burnt, supposedly to release the spirit. For centuries, people have created these illusions. And for centuries, people have believed them. Hidden in the countryside of southern England is one of the country's most notorious haunted houses. Built in the 12th century, the Ram Inn is owned by John Humphreys, who lives there with his family.
My wife and I were above a grave. I didn't know it was a grave, and my 3 little children at the other side, opposite. I was grabbed by the hands and pulled out the bed. That was the biggest fright I've ever had. I knew nothing about ghosts. I didn't know the place was haunted.
Since that day, John has got used to sharing the inn with his unusual guests.
No, they don't bother me. I think it makes life a little bit more interesting, if that's the right word. I've seen people going down the stairs, all of a sudden picked up and flung back up again. And I've seen the furniture thrown down the stairs. Now, my eldest daughter fled from here, frightened her to death.
John seems happy to leave things as they are, and the inn does attract countless ghost hunters.
Hello, John. Nice to see you. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the Ram. Tom. Hi. Come on in, then.
Paranormal investigators Mark and Julie Hunt and colleague Dr. Paul Lee are frequent visitors to the Ram. Armed with motion detector cameras, their aim is to photograph any unusual phenomena. This time, they may be in luck.
And while our colleagues were setting up our equipment, Mark and I decided to go around the house and take random photographs. We took a couple of shots at the top of the stairs looking down.
Ghost hunters believe these glowing balls of light are the souls of the dead.
It wasn't an actual person, it was like mist, and it looked like it was trying to take the shape of something. That apparition was standing a couple of feet in front of me, so I was quite frightened, to be honest. It could have touched me, it could have walked through me, it could have walked past me.
But could it have just been flare on the lens? Tales of child sacrifice, devil worship and suicides have long been associated with the inn. Are these unquiet spirits trying to return? Mark thinks so.
One of the theories is that ghosts need energy to manifest themselves into a full human shape. So when the photograph was taken, it might have actually been in the process of going from an amorphous shape into a full figure, or there may have been a full figure there and it's going back to an amorphous shape.
It's a theory that's hard to prove, and the three want an answer. Dating from ancient times, Ouija boards are said to provide a direct line to the spirit world. Ouija means yes, yes. Users ask the spirit questions, and the answers are spelled out on the board. Psychologist Kieran O'Keefe has an explanation for what might be happening at the session.
It could be paranormal. It could be actually communicating with departed spirits. The third thing that can happen is something that Michael Faraday looked at in 1853, and that's to do with micromuscular movement. So subconsciously making your muscles move on your hands, which results in movement. He looked at it in relation to table turning, but the same sort of phenomena, physical phenomena, may be going on with Ouija boards.
Ouija boards are a favourite tool for ghost hunters, and even for the general public. In 1960s America, they outsold the board game Monopoly. Like Monopoly, are they just harmless fun and games? Richard Wiseman.
When you have a whole group of people who really expect and want to get a message that they're unconsciously pushing all of the time. And some people will be pushing in one direction towards one letter, other people will be pushing towards other letters. But at some point, without realizing it, all of those expectations line up. Suddenly, everyone is pushing in the same direction, and that will cause the planchette to suddenly move.
He said he was murdered here, didn't he?
Yeah.
Did you live in Wootton-under-Edge? No.
The line to the spirit world has been particularly clear tonight, much better than usual. Paul Lee explains.
It's been ages since I've had results this good before. Most time we just get junk, we get rubbish from the board. It spells out any combination of letters.
Julie, Richard and Paul are thrilled by their results. But what happens if you're a conventional scientist and skeptic and you see a ghost? Can you believe the evidence of your own eyes? Vic Tandy, a scientist at the University of Coventry in England, was working alone one night in his laboratory.
I started to notice a sort of grey object moving to my left, and it wasn't distinct at all. It was just as if there was a slight movement. And slowly it moved round to the side of me and started to take on sort of form. It started to take on sort of arms and legs. It was quite a frightening experience. I noticed that I was hyperventilating. I just had to force myself to do something about it. So what I did was turn to look at it to try and assess more accurately what it was. And in that process, as I looked at it, the thing sort of slowly disappeared.
Vic's experience is typical of many reported ghost sightings. But being a scientist, he was determined to dig deeper. The next day, the same thing happened again, and this time, objects in the room were vibrating.
My guess was that as we had no heavy equipment actually attached to the room, it was sound and it was airborne. So then I went off to find out where it might be coming from, and that was relatively easy. It turned out that a huge extractor fan had been fitted.
The fan was producing infrasound, a low bass frequency inaudible to the human ear. Combining this information with NASA's research on the effects of infrasound on the human eye, Vic had a revelation.
My hypothesis was that the low-frequency sound, first of all, caused you to hyperventilate, which brought on all these feelings of presence and that there was something wrong, and that it was also possible to cause visual disturbance. It was in your peripheral vision that would appear grey because peripheral vision is monochrome, and so you would see a grey object in your peripheral vision, which if you then turned to look at it, which is what I did, would disappear because of the high quality optics would be capable of filtering out that sort of information.
Had Vic found the answer, not just to his ghost, but many other sightings as well? Infrasound is found in many natural phenomena, like storms and wind. Animals can hear it, but humans can't. Its frequency is so low, it can make our internal organs vibrate. Could it be a reason for seeing ghosts? Richard Wiseman was certainly curious to know more. In a controlled experiment, he played music to an audience. Some pieces were laced with infrasound. The audience responses ranged from anxiety and sorrow to fear and revulsion, all feelings that could be linked to the supernatural. But infrasound can't explain everything. Objects and people flying through thin air. In 1977, this very ordinary house in North London apparently became home to a malicious poltergeist. The house, and whatever was in it, became famous. An investigator from the highly respected Centre for Psychical Research was called in, Marco Gross.
So I went along, and when I got there, at this house, I realized there was something real going on.
Living in the house were the Harper family, a divorced mother and her 4 children.
Small fires broke out in drawers in the kitchen, and when you opened the drawer, the fire instantly went out. We had water coming from the ceiling where there were no pipes above, nothing to do with the roof or anything, water coming down. Overnight, things arranged in straight lines, pots of flowers arranged in straight lines and on the kitchen floor. Furniture overturning, big furniture.
Poltergeist means rattling ghost. It describes a spirit who wants to communicate with the living by making noises or moving things around. Was a poltergeist tormenting this family? At the center of the storm was Janet, the second daughter.
Janet was a bright girl, very energetic child. Unfortunately, during the time, sometimes she used to go into very violent trances, where she was so strong that at one time we had a social worker who was coming in to help us. She was an ex-policewoman. And at one time, Janet, little girl of 11 years old, she picked up this woman and threw her off the bed.
After 2 years, the disturbances suddenly stopped. Apart from photographs and eyewitness accounts, there was little hard evidence. Marco Gross is convinced that the Enfield poltergeist was real.
We're brought up from small children to believe that this universe, this life, this everything is as we see it. It's not. It's not nothing like it. It's a tiny, tiny part of it.
So was this poltergeist a genuine invasion by an angry spirit? Does science have another explanation?
With the Enfield case and with lots of other poltergeist cases, what you have is apparently objects flying across the room. The spirits become really angry, they enter the environment and they move objects. Now the question is, well, what's the evidence for that? Because, you know, we know that people's minds play tricks on them. Maybe they just thought they saw an object move when it didn't actually move. Or maybe it's an actual trick. Young children love to be at the center of attention. And so when the adults aren't looking, they might throw an object. And then the adults become really excited and think that's the poltergeist at work. So we need to be able to rule out those sorts of explanations. And the only real way of doing that is to get good evidence on film, on videotape, of objects moving when there could not be any possibility of human agency. And in my opinion, the evidence simply doesn't exist.
But there is a case where some of that vital evidence does exist. In 1967, the German town of Rosenheim was about to be shaken up by a very strange phenomena. The offices of the Adams law firm began to suffer from major power surges, often to levels that appeared uncontrollable. Light bulbs burst, pictures moved, machines were disturbed. When officials investigated the power networks, everything appeared to be normal. Erich Schartl was part of a puzzled team.
After we did our measurements, we started to doubt that they were right, because there were still enormous surges in the network.
As a precaution, a new network was installed. Still nothing changed. Physicist Friedbert Karger remembers.
There was no overloading on the network, but the power station's monitors recorded massive fluctuations.
So massive that at one point the inkhead on the monitors actually ripped the paper while it was printing. These were powers that you can't imagine, and we couldn't explain them.
And then things got stranger. Telephone records showed hundreds of calls to the speaking clock, which no one admitted making. Was it a prank or something darker? Annemarie Schabel was a typist with the firm. At the time, like everyone else, she had no idea of what was going on.
I didn't really think anything of it back then. I expected it to be a fault on the line, just like everybody else thought in the office. We blame the telecom people.
Technicians checked the telephone installations. Again, no faults were found. Walter Adam was a young man at the time.
There were also lamps in the hallway that started shaking when people walked through.
And then I realized that every time I walked through, someone said, "It's happened again." And if I turned around, the lamp was swinging.
What powers were at work here? The curious events soon grabbed media interest, and a film of the strange case was made. It became clear the inexplicable things only happened when Anna-Marie Charbel was present. She was a young mother at the time. Eventually the police were called in and questioned her.
How do you do it, he said. Just tell me how you do it. And he sat there for an hour in front of me. I don't know, I said. I don't know.
Whenever something happened, the girl was there, but she would become really stiff, couldn't move. And then later on, as things progressed, if something happened, foam would start seeping from her mouth.
Could Anna-Marie really cause all this uproar on her own? For the media, she was an easy target. They called her a witch. The investigators used all the modern methods available, filming the office, Anna-Marie, and the destruction that seemed to surround her. They even managed to catch this picture, apparently moving on its own. They believed they had found proof that it was a poltergeist tormenting the office. The Rosenheim case is one of the best documented ghost stories in history. Every strange event was recorded, but no one found an answer that explained how or why it all happened. And the woman at the center of it all still searches for the truth.
There was something there. That kind of thing doesn't just happen. Why should I suddenly have such powers? It's impossible. Impossible. I'm a totally normal person with a totally normal brain that can think normally. There must be something more to it.
30 years on, and science may now be providing some better answers. With the help of technology, scientists can even create the ultimate virtual haunted house. Will it be as terrifying as the real thing? Edinburgh, Scotland. The 18th century vaults below the South Bridge once housed the poor people of the city. But they had to share the damp arches with some gruesome neighbors. As a tour guide, Adam Wollaston is familiar with its history.
One of the most famous groups of criminals that were ever associated with these vaults were the body snatchers. You would have to take your body once you'd got it out of the grave and hide it as quickly as possible before anyone saw you. The best place they found to hide these bodies was right here in the South Bridge vaults. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many ghost stories about this place.
Many people have reported seeing strange things here. With its dark, low ceilings and dank atmosphere, it's an ideal hiding place for the supernatural. It's precisely these conditions that Richard Wiseman was keen to explore, and in 2001, he launched another paranormal investigation. Each of the 218 participants was asked to spend 10 minutes alone in the vaults. Kieran O'Keefe was part of the research team.
They were free to walk around within the vault, to sit down, to stand still. They were free to do whatever they wanted, but they just had to report any unusual experiences that they had.
Some people would feel a burning on their arm. They would actually think perhaps they were too close to a candle and turn around and the candle was a very long way away. Or they heard footsteps. One person heard their name whispered into their ear.
There was definitely a feeling over there of something going past. The coldness on the ankle, and it was like something brushed it. And that's when I was sort of squealed. Very brave.
After a few minutes, I felt a really hot burning itch on the inside of my left arm, and it got hotter and itchier.
Some of them had experienced something which was reasonably extreme, thought that we'd played a trick on them. So they'd say, well, that was really clever, the way you managed to get the guy with the apron to walk across the door. And we said, what are you talking about? That we wouldn't play that kind of trick. This is a scientific experiment. And at that moment, the experience really became dramatic for them. They suddenly realized they had seen something which simply did not exist in the material world.
What was it they thought they saw? The spirits of the undead? Or something else?
And the darkness plays a huge factor in that. It's the fear factor. In a lot of these cases that you hear of, a lot of these witness reports, darkness is the fear factor.
Okay, there's just no way I'd come down here on my own again. I would have to be in a party or a group, but I wouldn't be left alone on here.
Now, I don't believe in ghosts. What I do believe is that people who are telling us their experiences, that they suddenly felt a sense of presence or felt very cold, are telling us the truth. And the interesting question to me, as a psychologist, is what's going on there.
There are no magnetic fields or exposure to infrasound in the vaults. Even the temperature is constant. So what was happening?
The main explanatory factor was the way the vault looked. The larger vaults, the darker vaults, the vaults where you would stand in them and say, well, it's a dark corner over there, maybe there's a ghost there, and I find that a really scary and possibly even terrifying idea. Those are the ones that were causing the experiences. So I think for the Edinburgh vaults, we're looking at a haunting which is visually driven.
At the Caledonian University in Glasgow, researchers are using the sharp end of science to test this theory. Could a scary virtual environment alter our actual perceptions? Using 3D animation, they recreated the Edinburgh vaults. Participants can take a virtual stroll and record any changes they sense. Computer game specialist Jonathan Sykes developed the model.
Now this is one of the most terrifying rooms. People see a shoesmith in the real environment in here. Very spooky. It's very interesting when you actually see the experiment in action, because I can actually see exactly what the participants seeing, and I can see that there really is nothing there, even though they're seeing very, very strong hallucinations. They're actually feeling breathing on the back of the neck, and I can see there's no one behind them.
And it's showing the power of our imagination, that once you feed people with these types of visual images, even though they're not in the actual location, it will still produce ghostly experiences.
To put the theory to the test, Richard wanted a real skeptic to sit alone in the vaults in the dark for a long time. His guinea pig is psychology postgraduate student Emma Beebe, who was positive she did not believe in ghosts. The results were filmed with infrared cameras. So how did she manage after the first 5 minutes?
No, you can hear what sounds like somebody who's breathing. That's quite terrifying. I'm pretty anxious here. You know, it sounded like somebody was right over there, standing in the corner of the room, and breathing through their mouth. That's the strangest thing. It's really like, it's really strange.
We were listening to her comments from another vault. And of course, as a psychologist, you have very mixed thoughts about that. There is somebody who's clearly in some level of distress. She wasn't quite certain about what was happening, whether it was her imagination or whether it really was a ghost.
Okay, I can definitely hear somebody here. I'm not enjoying it. I'm really not enjoying it. The sound of somebody breathing. And I was scared and I was worried, thinking, is it going to come towards me? Is it coming over here? If it knows that I'm here, does it want to get closer to me? Or do you have a total sense of being watched or something?
I think we could have taken any one of our participants and anyone would have that type of experience. So what we're looking at here, in my opinion, is an absolutely fascinating area of psychology, that our imagination plays tricks on us, and under some circumstances those tricks can really be quite extreme.
So what do you do if you've had this experience? You're essentially by yourself. And so I slept with the light on for a few days and wondered, is this thing, if it's in my head, then what if I decide unconsciously that it's in my room?
Sometimes people see what they want to see. In the First World War, everyone heard stories of the Angels of Mons, an army of ghostly archers defending the British during their retreat. Hundreds of soldiers swore they'd seen them. But the story was complete fiction, written by a journalist before the retreat. Although he explained what he had done, reports of sightings of the Guardians in the sky kept coming in. For the soldiers engulfed in the inhuman horrors of the trenches, the angels were real. They believed what they needed to believe in order to survive. The influence of magnetic fields, the vibrations of infrasound, the power of darkness and the human imagination. It seems science could be catching up with ghosts. But scientific explanations can't change what people want to be true. And ghosts bring us mixed messages. If they can return from the grave, perhaps we can all defy death. There are still cases where rational science seems to have no answer. In 1971, the remote Spanish village of Belmez became home to a truly extraordinary phenomenon. It's a mystery that followed Maria Gomez for over 3 decades.
I was cooking one day when I saw the face on the floor. But I didn't give it any attention. I had a fever then, and thought that must have been the reason why I saw this strange face. I didn't take it seriously at all.
But it wasn't Maria's fever. A few days later, the face returned.
Wherever you stood, the face watched you. It almost seemed like it was moving its eyes.
Alerted by the press, visitors and scientists swarmed in from around the globe. investigations discovered that Maria's house was built on a graveyard, and directly beneath the image of the face, human remains were discovered. The floor was replaced, and even more faces appeared. Nobody could find an explanation.
Even the scientific researchers were here from Madrid. For 10 days they searched here with their tools and equipment and tried to find something. Before they left, I asked them if they could tell me what they had discovered. They told me, "No one can discover the truth here. We will die and never find out what it is." I don't know what this thing is. It's truly something amazing.
The faces were varied, some faint, some clear. And some looking very familiar. What or who was producing them? Neighbors mentioned a young man living in the village who was a skilled artist, but no connection was ever discovered. Pedro Sogrobe is a parapsychologist investigating the case. At the time of his research, he was convinced of the link between the woman and the phenomena.
We know that the faces can't appear without Maria, and we know that once Maria leaves the house, the faces fade. We also know that when Maria's psychological state is weak, if she's feeling down or tired, then the faces lose intensity.
Just like photographs, the faces go through a slow developing process. Yet no traces of chemicals or dyes had been found.
Only God knows why the faces appeared to me. Because how many other houses have the same concrete as mine, yet this hasn't happened anywhere else? Only here, in this house.
Sabemos perfectamente que las caras no se forman sin María.
The faces usually go through a weird transformation process, like a molecular formation of the dark particles in the concrete. First they form lines, and then reshape into faces.
Maria Gomez died in February 2004, aged 85. Her belief in her faces never wavered. Just before her death, she said,
"I would like them to come with me. After all, they have given me so much company throughout my life. So I would like them to keep me company in the next world. So people can see that it wasn't fraud, that what happened here is real."
With her death, the faces were expected to disappear. They did something far stranger. They resurfaced in a nearby house where Maria was born. A final twist to her own ghost story.
If poltergeists and spirits and ghosts are genuine, if they really exist, they are going to revolutionize how we see the world. Hundreds of years of scientific thought will simply be wrong. So before we make that decision, before there's a revolution within science, we better have the right evidence.